It is my pleasure to introduce Marc, the founder and CEO of Deliberate AI. Hi, Marc. Good to see you. We're happy to have you back and share a little bit more about Deliberate AI. So let's start there. Go ahead and please introduce yourself and Deliberate AI to the audience.
Yes, thanks, Riley, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm Marc Aafjes, founder and CEO of Deliberate AI. What we do is we aim to make mental health care more objective. So one of the challenges we see is that diagnosis and outcome measurement is quite subjective in mental health, and we're using more objective technologies to do that. And the way we've started is using audio-visual signals from telemedicine or Zoom calls like this one, and we extract from that a kind of a variety of signals, from vocal acoustics to the way people move their face, head movement. And we correlate those to mental health conditions so that we can better diagnose and track outcomes.
And speaking to some of those technologies, as you just described, in telemedicine, what are the ways in which the challenges with patient self-reporting, as you mentioned, you're using technology and there's unfrequency and unreliability in self-reporting. So what does Deliberate AI do to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the key reasons why we got started. Like, one of the challenges is that only 1 in 3 clinicians actually routinely checks on symptoms, use routine outcome measurement tools with their patients. And even if they do, only 1 in 3 patients actually fills them in consistently. So one of the big challenges that we first of all have is that there's a huge missing data problem where we don't really know what's going on. And then secondly, self-report has the downside is that a lot of the things that self-report measures ask patients to reflect on are especially those things that they're in treatment for. So their ability to accurately reflect on how they're feeling, how they're doing is sometimes hard. So that's where by us being in the background, we can measure these symptoms and give more objective reading without putting any additional burden on patients or clinicians. And so we're doing that with things like depression, anxiety, and we predict the routine skills there. We're also now moving into some exciting work we're doing with DARPA around suicide prediction. So not only how do we measure outcomes, but also how do we start predicting risk using more objective signals that are often missed by clinicians.
Absolutely. So, you're utilizing technology to take something that is subjective in nature and making it more objective through all the technology that you have. So how can that be taken to payers in order to get them to adopt the Deliberate AI algorithms around your collection of that reliable data to improve decision-making and outcomes?
Yeah. So our initial target has been both clinicians, healthcare providers, where we're helping them not just measure outcomes, but also using the same technologies to improve workflow by summarizing what's actually being said, helping them with the clinical notes, so some of the low-hanging fruit. And the other use case that we have is in clinical trials. Now, what we're starting to do, we're in clinical trials, we're trying to more accurately assess treatment response. Now, with payers, one of the things that we're seeing is there's a growing desire for payers to start getting more focus on getting good outcome tracking of what are these treatments actually delivering me. And it's not just the large insurance companies, but also self-insured corporates that are spending a lot of money on say mental health care treatments with uncertain outcomes. So we've had a wave where there's been a lot of focus on how do we get access, how do we get equitable access to mental health care. And we're expecting and we're seeing some movement to say, well, how do we better grasp what's working, what isn't working, and how do we have better data to actually track outcomes and understand what's driving those? So we're seeing that going up, and I think there's a self-drive within payers now that utilization is growing up to make sure that they have a better grasp of outcomes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties in, directly to value-based care. So again, getting paid for the positive outcome and not that typical fee-for-service model. So what are some of the things that you've seen just in the field of mental health and how it relates to value-based care? I know you've spoken to it a little bit about, making sure that you're having good, reliable, objective data. But can you just talk basically to, mental health care and how it relates to value-based care?
Yeah. So I think we're starting to see some movements towards value-based kind of care contracts where providers are having these kind of contracts there. Kind of currently, a lot of the outcome data that they're kind of providing or being requested for by payers is quite basic.
One of the things you mentioned is, making sure that patients are getting good outcomes and adopting the value-based care model to where you're getting paid based on the outcomes and not the typical fee-for-service model. So in the realm of mental health and value-based care, what can you speak to on how advanced AI algorithms are going to play a role in to helping overcome some of those limitations of the, maybe subjective or unreliable data?
Yeah. So that's a great point. I think one of the things in mental health care is that we've seen that it's a little bit behind value-based care compared to kind of other areas in healthcare. And where some of these contracts are taking place, like the kind of outcomes or agreements between providers and payers are typically based around kind of quite unsophisticated outcome tracking tools. So by kind of us and others providing more objective outcomes, we can start enabling that kind of transaction to be more rigorous. And then the next part is where AI can play a huge role. And we've done some early proofs of concept around this. Well, how do we use that to also not just track outcomes, but also provide providers with insight on how to improve those outcomes? So I mentioned a little bit about suicide risk, which we're doing some exciting work around. Another thing is, for instance, working alliance, a very specific element around the relationship between, say, a therapist, a psychiatrist, and a patient. That's actually one of the biggest drivers of outcomes. Now, some of these things we can start making objective and providing this as feedback to clinicians, so they can actually use AI to not just track outcomes, which is already helpful, but use that with additional insights to actually improve those outcomes as well.